Hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy Friday morning. Hope everyone is doing fantastic. It's Friday. It's our weekly buzz session that we have, a panel discussion that Cincy Connects hosts. And today's topic is municipalities, opt-ins, challenges, and ballot initiatives. And I could not have asked better people to be a part of this discussion. We have Tammy Vandenberg. Hello, Tammy.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. We have Adrian Heemond. Thank you for being with us this morning with Grassroots Midwest. Tammy's with the West Michigan Cannabis Guild.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And then Scott Roberts with Scott Roberts Law. Thanks for being here. And then Matt Abel, jack of all trades, Executive Director of Michigan Normal and with Cannabis Council. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jamie.
Really quick, before I start in with the questions, I'm going to give each of you the opportunity to kind of talk about, what you do in the industry and, your involvement in municipalities currently and your background. So Tammy, we'll start with you.
All right. Thanks again for putting this together. I'm excited to be here and have the conversation. Just a little bit about me. I was involved with decriminalized GR back in 2012, and we successfully passed that, which decriminalized small amounts of possession in the city. And then went on to join MI Legalized. Was honored to serve towards the end with Matt and others, and saw that victory through. And post that win, we launched Safe and Smart Michigan, which was a ballot initiative to force the city of Grand Rapids to opt into medical. And lastly, I am co-chair and co-founder of the newly formed West Michigan Cannabis Guild.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Tammy. And Adrian, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm Adrian Heemond. I'm the CEO at Grassroots Midwest. We're a political consulting firm out of Lansing. So we work in a lot of different areas of politics. Specific to cannabis, we do a lot of stuff with municipalities, helping folks get licensed, whether that's through, a city council, township board process, or through a voter-initiated law process.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And Scott Roberts.
Hi, I'm Scott Roberts. My company is Scott Roberts Law. It's a boutique cannabis business focused law firm. My background has been, corporate real estate, municipal law. We work with a lot of, municipalities here in the state of Michigan with respect to their opt-in ordinance, applications, license transfers, kind of the whole 9 yards. And I'm also in my spare time, I'm a broker for Michigan Cannabis Properties, which is another company I'm the managing member.
All right. Thank you, Scott. And then Mr. Matt Abel.
Hi, Jamie. Good morning, everyone. I'm Matthew Abel. I'm a marijuana lawyer, and we have the firm Cannabis Council downtown. The picture of the building is behind me. I'm the director of Michigan Normal. I was on the MI Legalized board, and we are excited to see what ballot proposals are going to be on the November ballot, and working to encourage municipalities to opt in. So
awesome. Thank you very much. Such a great discussion. We are looming on a deadline coming up when it comes to ballot initiatives. And, I wanted to choose this topic because it's a topic that I find myself very passionate about. It really frustrates the heck out of me that municipalities do have as much control as they have, with very little knowledge of the cannabis industry. And it really holds us back a bit as an industry. So, Adrian, I'd like to begin with you and some of the questions that we have for you. So my first question is, can you explain to our audience a little bit about what that current law is, that gives the municipalities the control that they have to allow or not allow cannabis businesses, both on the medical and recreational side?
Sure. Well, so the state of play with municipalities right now, the ball is, as you alluded to, basically 100% in the municipality's court. It's really up to them as to, whether they want to opt out or opt in. Obviously, some of the municipal organizations in the state, like the Michigan Municipal League and the Michigan Townships Association, came right out of the gate after the ballot initiative passed in 2018, and we're encouraging their members to opt out, at least provisionally, until the state got its rules process together. And so the place where a lot of cannabis business owners or potential entrepreneurs find themselves is trying to sort out this web of, well, did this community opt out? Or did they opt back in? And it can be really confusing for people, but the decision, it really resides with the local government, unless citizens decide to do a voter-initiated law, which is something that the ballot initiative afforded them. And it's compared to other voter-initiated type situations in other areas in Michigan, it's relatively easy to get it on the ballot. Passing it's another matter, and we've seen some historical evidence, in the short track record that we've got with that, about the difficulty of passing one of those. But that's really the out for concerned citizens who don't like what their local government has chosen to do or not do, is to go to the ballot.
Right. And so what does that process actually look like to get an initiative on the ballot? And what is the biggest ingredient that you need to be successful?
Well, the process is not that difficult. There are a few steps that go into this, and I should preface this by saying that I'm not an attorney, so I'm not giving anyone legal advice. There are some very good attorneys that are on with us, and I'd encourage you to talk to them offline about this if you got specific questions. But the process really starts with collecting signatures. You need to form a ballot committee, which is a process that you do with your county clerk. You submit paperwork to the county clerk to form a ballot committee, and then you go out and you collect signatures. The initiative that was passed by Michigan voters in 2018 says that you need to gather signatures equal to 5% of voters in the last gubernatorial election. When you think about most communities in Michigan, there are about 7,000 cities, villages, and townships in the city of Michigan. In most jurisdictions in Michigan, that's a really tiny number of signatures that you need to get on the ballot. You figure most small towns, maybe it's a couple hundred signatures, it might be less. We certainly encourage people to gather more than the number of valid signatures that they need. So if 100 is the number that's equal to 5% of voters in the last gubernatorial election, we encourage you to get double that number, so to get 200 if that's your number. You turn those signatures in to get your ballot access. In terms of what's the most important thing, it's really motivating voting behavior, right? The whole point of this is to be able to put this on the ballot, and for citizens in this jurisdiction to be able to say, this is what we want. And so in order for you to be successful with that, you really have to get your message out into the community. And that means having some knowledge about the community, what groups are important, where people gather, that sort of thing. But it also means paid communications. And some of those tactics are very old school, direct mail, things like that. Knocking on people's doors, which is difficult right now. Although we are seeing people drop literature, not necessarily knock on people's doors. The cannabis space is a little weird in terms of paid communications because of what some of the advertising platforms will allow you to do for digital advertising, which, in the case of Google, they just will not. You can't do anything that features a cannabis leaf, can't do anything that, that is promoting cannabis whatsoever. Google just simply won't accept that. So that cuts off a whole slice of paid voter communication that you can do. And for a lot of political campaigns, we would engage in what's called geotargeting, where we're capturing people's cell phones, we're targeting their homes based on the voter list. You can't do any of that. So it really requires some old school hand-to-hand combat tactics in terms of political organizing and communication in order to get enough voters to show up at the ballot box and say yes.
Absolutely. So can you talk a little bit about which Michigan municipalities that we know will already have ballot initiatives coming up this year? And how can the cannabis community as a whole help with those and help those communities be successful?
Well, we know there's going to be one in Ionia. They turned in ballot paperwork to the county clerk and are going to be gathering signatures shortly. They don't need very many. So expect that one to appear on the ballot, assuming that the city council doesn't adopt an ordinance in advance of that, which they may. There are a few other communities where there are rumors that there are going to be ballot initiatives. I'm not aware of anybody that's turned their signatures in yet. Deadline's coming up towards the end of this month. So we've heard rumors about a number of communities where that's going to happen, but I'm not aware of anybody that's actually turned in their SIGs.
Is it possible to try to pull this together right now without already have started that process? Is it possible for some of these community leaders to do that?
Sure, it really depends on the size of the community. I would not recommend trying to get something like this off the ground in a community where you need to turn in more than 100, 150 valid signatures. It's possible, but it's more expensive, and it's a lot of organizing effort, particularly with the current conditions around the coronavirus pandemic. A lot of people are just going to be reluctant to talk to you if you're out there with a clipboard trying to gather signatures. Whether it's the post office or wherever you're going to, people want to slap on their mask and get in and out. So it's possible to do to make your deadline for ballot access for November. If you're in a smaller community, I wouldn't try to do that in a community of much size, though.
Okay. And so how should we be looking at 2021 then? Are there opportunities there? I know it's a little harder in those off election years.
It is and it's not. I made allusion earlier to the coronavirus pandemic. I think that actually creates some opportunity for cannabis entrepreneurs and concerned folks in the community who want to see retail, recreational, or medical cannabis, because local governments are going to be starved for revenue for the foreseeable future. Whether they get a bailout from the federal government or not, local government budgets were already under a great deal of pressure before tax revenues started to plummet because businesses were closing. For communities that have an income tax, obviously people's income has taken a huge hit. So I think there's a real opportunity here to productively engage with citizens who don't want to see massive cuts to services. This is another revenue source.
Yeah, that's music to my ears, considering that our industry supplies jobs, it supplies more revenue to our communities. I think there's a huge opportunity come 2021. Thank you very much, Adrian. Now, Scott Roberts, I'm going to ask you, you'll have to unmute yourself because I did mute you. And so tell us a little bit about your experience so far in working municipalities throughout Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of variety, and for me, a lot of driving throughout the state. I think I visited more places in Michigan over the last year and a half, 2 years, just driving to all these municipalities than I had my entire previous life before, I got into cannabis. So, everything is, one thing I see is, some things are super formal. They have the public comment period, everything is very formal. And then you go to places and things are incredibly informal. It's just like, there's 5 township trustees, 5 people in the audience, and it's just one big conversation. There's no public comment period per se. It's just, everyone's just talking and kind of have a back and forth dialogue. So, there's a lot of different ways to approach that, and tailoring your approach to the municipality is a very important thing. But in the end, when you're working with these municipalities, at least on the part of trying to get them to kind of opt in, you really got to focus on what do they want, how does it benefit them, and kind of tailor your approach really around that. And each one is different. I have I've been advocating in a few municipalities for micro businesses. In some I'll go in and, I'll talk about the excise tax and how it gives you a bigger share and all of that. And they just don't seem to care. But then that same municipality, I'll start talking about, mom and pop business ownership, and then everyone's eyes light up and it's like, all right, I guess this is the key point. This is what, really hits home. And then, I was just in a municipality a couple of weeks ago and on this topic, and all of a sudden, it was both. It was jobs and mom and pop. So everything is different. And that's something I've really learned is there's just no one size fits all approach to these municipalities. They're all filled with different people with different views. And sometimes they're similar. Sometimes rural town A is pretty similar to rural town B, or big city A is similar to big city B. But, you just got to realize that, behind that municipality is just people. And, people are very different. And, you can't approach everyone in every municipality the same way.
Right. And then, so what's the biggest lesson that you have learned in working with municipalities and doing the work that you do?
So kind of going off what I just said, there's no cookie cutter approach. That's the one thing, it's not like I go to the planning commission, do my public comment, I talk to some people after, do that 3 times, and boom, it's done. There is no one size fits all approach to this, because like I said, every municipality is totally different. There's one, we went and, my client asked me to draft an ordinance. I drafted an ordinance. We went there, we gave it to them. They asked questions for about 15 minutes. They're like, all right, we like it. Let's do it. And then, there's other places where, it's a 9-month process with a first reading, a second reading, then they go back and amend it, then they send it back to the planning commission, and then it comes back to the city council, and it's just all over the place. So, I guess the biggest lesson I've learned, and, I kind of knew it, but I just didn't really know the extent of it, is that there's no cookie cutter approach to this. You're dealing with individuals, and you really have to tailor your approach to those individuals, and really kind of get a sense for what they want, what they need, what they're looking for, what their concerns are. A lot of times, it's not necessarily always about what they want, but they're just afraid of certain things. There's still a lot of stigma in this industry. Dispensaries still scare a lot of old people, to be honest with you. The grows, not quite as much. But, just kind of knowing what those objections are going to be, and then, addressing them. I mean, I know sometimes it's, we can scoff at some of them, like when they're like, oh, the dispensary is going to bring crime to the area. It's going to attract all these drug users. And it's easy to just kind of just dismiss it and just be like, you're crazy. But, those people, they need to be educated. And it's not that they're dumb or they're ignorant or anything like that. They just don't know. So, kind of walking them through that process and educating them. A lot of people will have open minds, even if they are initially against it. Sometimes there's just that person who's just not going to change his mind no matter what you do. And you just kind of have to ignore that person and focus on, the other 4 people on the board or something like that. But, just kind of approaching this and kind of really coming up with a strategy ahead of time with the municipality, and then also being able to adapt that strategy based off the feedback you get.
And what are the best ways of addressing hesitations that you see by these elected officials?
So, sometimes we'll address it at a public comment period, but a lot of times what I'll do is, once all these meetings end, everyone generally kind of stays around for a little bit and kind of addressing it one-on-one. And maybe offering them, for instance, with the micro businesses, sometimes I'll just tell them, hey, I have a website, marijuanamicrobusinesses.com. Go to it, read up about it. I've written about 15, 20 articles on it. And, let me know if you have any questions. Here's my card. If you have any concerns, I'm more than happy to address them. But you don't want to kind of go at them with like kind of an attacking style. Like, you should know this. That's just going to put them automatically on the defensive. And that's the last thing you want to do, is put these people on the defensive. So you really kind of just got to open it up and just kind of come to them as if like, I want to learn from you and you can learn from me, not just like a one-way dialogue.
And what does an ideal relationship between a municipality and a cannabis business owner look like to you?
Well, it's one where, everyone's very familiar with each other and there's a certain level of trust. Because, in this industry, there's a lot of skepticism towards these businesses. I've seen it in a lot of places. Like, there's one city council person, I'm not going to name it, it's Lanny, who said some things at a meeting 6 months ago that just, caused my jaw to drop. But, kind of building that relationship, because you're going to be operating there in the long term. Hopefully, that's the goal, is that you're going to be in this place for the long term. And that means you're going to be a member of that community, whether you like it or not. So, having a positive relationship, not just with that one city manager, but with more people in the community, especially in these small towns of, population 700. You're a dick to one of your neighbors, then they're going to tell their 5 neighbors, and then all of a sudden the entire town knows. And then, you come next meeting, you have half the town showing up, speaking out against you. So, the ideal relationship is, with a municipality, is really kind of making yourself a member and a trusted member of that community.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Scott. Appreciate it. Great feedback. Tammy, now it's your turn. Wanted to talk to you about, so you personally have experienced quite a bit of a battle with the city of Grand Rapids. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and some of the issues that you face there?
Yeah, so you want me to relive my nightmare 13-month disaster. Yes, happy to do it if it could possibly help somebody else not have to go through that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we, myself, Jeff Hank, who some of y'all know, and my brother, Jeff Vandenberg, submitted an application for a provisioning center on South Division in Grand Rapids in March of 2019. And we were denied in April of 2020. So we waited 13 months. Grand Rapids did a lottery, and the stated goal of the ordinance in Grand Rapids was to advance locals. Lots of us fought for that, and particularly, like Scott mentioned, the mom and pop folks. We wanted women, we wanted people of color, we wanted people harmed by the drug war. So those were all the folks that we were fighting for. And the City Commission did make some efforts. They had a scoring system. Unfortunately, they threw in that you had to be pre-qualified by the state to get into that lottery. And at that time, folks were waiting, some folks were getting through quickly, others were waiting up to a year. It was just all over the place. They had that horrible corrupt board for a while. So most locals in Grand Rapids, because we've been so behind on all things cannabis in the Grand Rapids area, that people didn't even really, they weren't even aware of what pre-qualification necessarily was. And so when they threw that into the ordinance, that knocked out almost every local. I was told that we were the only application submitted that had majority local ownership. We did not get our pre-qualification in time, so we were not in the lottery. We were number 87. That was our number in the queue, 87. And initially, the Planning Commission was going to hear up to 5 or 6 applications per meeting, but that got too cumbersome for them, and so they went down to 2, maybe 3 if we were lucky, which drew out this process to over a year. So we ended up waiting over a year. Of course, then COVID hit, and then they just canceled all the meetings. So sorry about the noise. They're taking down a tree across the street, of course, right now. But anyway, so the rules, the way I was thinking about it this morning, and the whole process felt like playing like the highest stakes poker game of my life, when the other players could change the rules at any point that they felt like it. So for example, we needed waivers. Grand Rapids has like a waiver system for so-called sensitive uses, places like religious institutions and schools and et cetera. And we were told we needed 2 waivers for our building. One was a park waiver, one was a religious institution waiver. And then I think 1 month before we finally got our day in the Planning Commission, we were notified that there were actually 2 other religious institutions within 1,000 feet that nobody was aware of. We had flyered, canvas, we had done community meetings, neighborhood association, business alliance, every type of outreach we possibly could. and no one was aware. It was this little tiny mosque. And then the other one, we were initially told was over 1,000 feet away, but then they remeasured and they said, no, it's actually like 998 feet away, something to that effect. So this was pulled on us a month before, and it was during COVID, so we were not able to go and talk with these folks. We sent them letters and asked them to reach out to us, and we never heard from anybody. And then an old school prohibitionist sort of rallied up all these religious institutions against us, and we were denied. It was a tie vote. It was just every single possible thing that could go wrong. We had a planning commissioner leave, who was very, very pro marijuana. We needed his vote, and he left the planning commission right before our meeting. He had lost his job due to COVID and needed to go find another job and didn't have time to be on the commission anymore. So, and then it was 4-4, and they were sitting there and trying to figure out what to do and talking with the attorney, and we're just sitting in this horrible purgatory. And finally, somebody changed their vote just to get it over with, I guess, and changed a vote from approving us to not approving us. So that's the story. It was brutal. It was brutal. But it is what it is. Can't spend your days being bitter.
Right, and it really is as brutal as it can almost get, you know, and that's why I wanted to share that, because, you know, I if you could go back and do it all over again, what would you do differently now, looking back?
You know, I was thinking about that, and frankly, based on all of the information that we had throughout the entire process, from the day we submitted to the day of the hearing, we made good decisions based on all of the information that we had and that we were able to access. And so, knowing now what I know, would I do it? You know, I probably would have, because even though we lost an enormous amount of money, enormous amount of time, I'm not one of those people. I don't like to be left wondering. I'm a calculated risk taker. I've won big and I've lost big. And that's just kind of how I have decided to live my life.
If you would ask the city of Grand Rapids to change one thing of what they did, what would that one thing be?
Whew. I have two things that are tied, so I have to mention both of those. But yeah, definitely requiring the pre-qualification was a disaster to all locals, including us. So that's a key issue. And then secondly, Grand Rapids has an astronomical amount of churches. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of churches. And so having that particular sensitive use knocks out the vast majority of the city. And it also, the process really set community members up against each other. And there was just incredible nastiness. Some projects paying off other churches to oppose other projects. The level of just sort of nastiness and corruption going on sort of between applicants, and then sort of throwing fuel into the fire of the folks that are terrified of marijuana, who think there's going to be dead bodies out in front of dispensaries. And so the whole process really brought out the worst in a lot of our community members. And it's gonna take a while to improve that. And so, yeah, we have to do something about the religious institutions, because otherwise there just will not be properties. And people now are fighting very, very hard, particularly in this climate. I don't think we have a single provisioning center with any level of Black ownership, any level of significant Black ownership. And 20% of our population is Black. There's not a single provisioning center that has a majority female ownership. It is almost exclusively men and almost exclusively white males. And so that's our fight now.
Right. Okay. And then, so You are the lead, you know, you developed the West Michigan Cannabis Guild, incredible group. You know, that's how we were able to get the city of Grand Rapids to actually move with the Smart and Safe GR committee. Do you think if more communities had an organization like the Guild, that do you think it has helped in West Michigan, and you think that that type of model will help other communities as well?
Yeah, Michael Tuffelmeyer, who some of y'all know, it was his idea to form the Guild, and I was immediately on board because, as he put it, we fought like hell to pass Prop 1, and then we go back to our town and we can't access any cannabis that is safe and affordable and not black market. So we wanted to get organized, and we wanted to bring people together. And I think, we're over 200 members now, and I'm blown away. I have an inbox full of people wanting more information and wanting to join. And yeah, I've just met so many fantastic people. We've mobilized in Muskegon Heights. We've mobilized in Grand Rapids. We've done all kinds of different events. We've submitted letters. We just submitted a letter to the city of Grand Rapids requesting the police budget be reduced, and some of those funds go towards helping Black-owned businesses and communities that have been most harmed by marijuana prohibition. And so, it's been great. I'm not going to lie, it's very challenging. It's a fascinating group. A lot of folks have been in the cannabis culture and world for many years, and so it's interesting. There's newcomers, there's big business, there's little business, there's ancillary business, and yeah, it's been really fantastic. I've really enjoyed it, and I think it's had a major impact.
And I love the work that you guys do to help support local candidates that are cannabis friendly and that support, everything that our industry can offer communities. So thank you. Thank you for the work that you do to help in West Michigan. I appreciate it.
Cheers.
All right, Matt Abel, your turn, sir. So tell us a little bit about your experiences of working with municipalities throughout Michigan. I know you've done quite a bit of work yourself.
Well, thanks, Jamie. It's, as the other speakers here have said, especially Scott, it's different in every community. I made a couple of notes. One of the things that struck me, like 10 years ago, we were in Battle Creek arguing for some kind of ordinance. And they had a public comment period, and there were, as I recall, about 80 people from the community who spoke, and almost everyone was in support in one way or another. So that brought home to me how widespread the support really is out there. But you look at the township, village, and city boards and commissions, they still tend to be a bunch of old white guys. And those people believe reefer madness more than anyone. And so it takes a while to get through to them. Their objections are, what about the kids? What about driving? We don't want, you can grow it here, but we don't want you selling it here, as if there aren't sales going on in every community in Michigan already underground. And one of the things I learned firsthand in the city of Springfield, when they actually passed an ordinance, there was a little old lady, gray-haired, on the board, sitting way on the end, and I'm looking at her while the other people are speaking, and they're going through the board for their comments, and I just had in my mind that she was a hard no. She just looked like a hard no, and it got to her, and she said, I think it's a pretty good idea. And so it struck me again about how you just can't tell by looking at somebody, and stop making assumptions that people are against you until you've got evidence that they're against you. So there's that. They do need a lot of education, and one of the lawyers in our firm put together some info pieces about kids that for example, they have less access to it because it's behind the counter and it's sold by someone who's checking IDs, as opposed to the illegal market where they'll sell to anybody. And the kids tend to use it less in places where it's legal. As far as health, that it tends to be a substitute for other substances, other harmful substances. And so I always argue the more cannabis there is in a community, not that cannabis in itself is good, although I think it is, but that it at least replaces more harmful substances. And they don't always get that. You need to just be persistent. One of the other things that I found is that me coming into a community as an outsider, they're not really going to give me a serious listen, because they just paint me as this person is a pro advocate and they're just going to say whatever they need to say to get this done. So what I found helpful, I always tell clients, you know, if you're dealing with a 5 or 7 or 9 member board, do your homework on those people on the board. If they're politicians, they probably have websites, they probably have Facebook pages, they probably have LinkedIn accounts and things like that. And you can do a lot of research on those members of the board and find out what organizations they're members of. Sometimes you can really find out what their political views are about a whole range of subjects, and then tailor the approach to what interests them, what they care about and are concerned about. One other thing is that I always tell I say to somebody, they want to get an ordinance in a small town. I'm like, well, did you grow up in that town? Do they know you? Do they trust you? Was your grandma a member? Did she live here years ago and all that? And I say, do you know anybody on the board? And they'll say, no, I don't. And I'll go through the names and I'll say, well, you need to find somebody who knows somebody on the board, because they're going to listen to their friend a lot better than they're going to listen to me as an outsider. And if you, as their friend, introduce me as the outsider, that'll give me some credibility and some access. And that just speeds the process up a whole lot, where, if they've known somebody 20 or 30 years and they're like, hey, I'm going to introduce you to somebody who I've gotten to know. And I think it just gives us a whole big boost. And we need to do more of that and use more of those people. Everybody knows somebody. I mean, the politicians all have connections everywhere. So let's figure that out and approach them. And yeah, those old white guys on the board might not smoke weed, but their grandkids do, and so it's a matter of finding, and you can't tell who smokes weed anymore. I mean, it used to be people wearing tie-dye, they were the only people who would admit to smoking weed anyway, because they didn't care what the hell people know. But now it's a bunch of people suing, and the fact tie doesn't tell you anything about whether they're going to be friendly or not, because a lot of those people are friendly. They're just living their conservative lives. And sometimes we give them space to open up and say, yeah, I think that's a good idea, where they're maybe not going to say it on their own. So to me, it's kind of a full court press. Figure out who the players are, everything you can know about them. And then in some places, you can set up informational meetings just on your own without it being a township board meeting, and just flyer the place and say, we're going to be at the VFW hall on Tuesday doing a presentation. If you have any questions, show up. And sometimes those flop, but sometimes they work. And the more exposure the community has to it, the more familiarity they have with it. And as supporters begin to come out of the woodwork, it frees the other ones to say, yeah, I think that's a good idea too, that they're not just alone in the wilderness, one person who, they don't want to stick their neck out if it's going to get shot down. I mean, politicians, if anything, are cautious. And so we need to give them cover I often carry with me the Institute of Medicine report on cannabis and cannabinoids because it's a government report. I say, you don't have to believe me. And I hold up the book and say, you know, this is your tax dollars at work. This is what the federal government has researched. And then I would have pages tagged where it's not a gateway drug and kids don't use it any more than in other communities and that kind of thing. So they don't have to just believe me. The information is there and it's available, and sometimes that's persuasive. So I think all of those things can be helpful. And a lot of times it's a lot easier to do it in a small community than it is in a large community. You just have less players, less churches maybe. I mean, Detroit is like Grand Rapids in that there's a church on every corner, and you know, it gets tough. At least in Detroit, they've said the churches that qualify are ones that are listed as tax exempt, and some of them are so incompetent they never file for a tax exemption for their real estate. And so at least you can kind of get a list of that. One of the other things is Detroit doesn't have a lot of money to maintain their parks, and parks are drug-free zones, and people will say, well, that's not a park. Nobody ever plays there. The grass isn't cut, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you know, if it's on the master plan and it's green, it's a park, you know, whether they use it or not. And then there are people who are like, well, we got to get the city to get rid of that park because it's really an impediment to our business. And I don't like that either. I say, look, I live here. I want parks. I mean, we want to keep those spaces. We want to maintain them. We want to bring them back. And someday, hopefully, we'll have the resources to do that. The wrong approach is to wipe out the park. The right approach is to change the ordinance so that it's not a hard 1,000-foot barrier. And there's all that. And you deal with the Board of Zoning Appeals. And it's crazy. On 8 Mile, I was on 8 Mile a couple of days ago. I went to the Reef for the first time, which was not even as fancy. After everything I'd heard, I thought it was going to be fancier than it is. Not that it's not nice, it's fine. But there is a dispensary right next door to it also. And somehow they got that through the Board of Zoning Appeals. What did impress me was the range of product that they have. I'm smoking less, so I'm trying a lot of different gummies, and I bought, you know, a package of quite a bit of, well, they gave me this, but you know, I bought a lot of different gummies because I'm trying to see what works and find the right dosage and all that. I got this one Wana Brands thing. It's hilarious because this was a freebie and it says it has 3 pieces in it. And the one I opened, it had 4 pieces in it. I was like, well, that's different. Yeah, and some of them come in little jars. The video doesn't work that well.
Right.
Anyway,
The virtual background
you can see right through it. So, you know, people assume that I've been to every dispensary in town, and who has time for that? You know, I mean, I'd like to, but and too many times we see outsiders who come into a community and think that they can steamroll them, and that's just not going to happen. And so people need to be more sensitive to that and try to include locals in the whole thing, because it does bring a lot of jobs, and we'd like to employ people in the local communities and focus on that. And maybe there's a way that ordinances can be written to give preferences. I mean, the scoring thing of ordinances too is a whole mess because it's so subjective. And oh, well, when we get outsiders coming in and they're like, I talked to somebody just last week who said, you know, we want to do a ballot initiative, and we don't think they want a lot of weed in this town, so we just want one dispensary. And of course, they think they're going to get it. And I tell them, well, first of all, you know, don't be careful what you wish for, because you may do all the legwork and get the ordinance passed for this one dispensary, and then the mayor's nephew is going to get it, you know. somebody who you didn't see coming out of the blue. They've been waiting in the wings the whole time. You do all the groundwork, you prepare the ordinance, you get it passed, and then you don't get it. So I'm a big believer in free enterprise and the free market system and competition. I think that's good for consumers. It brings prices down. It gives you better quality and choice and all of that. And my argument is, hey, if they don't all make it, that's okay. That they're going to at least have brought buildings up to code, made them sufficient where maybe another business now can move in there if they're going to move out. And it's just good for, now the clients don't like that. They're like, I want to be the only one. And I try to convince them that sometimes having a concentration of businesses in an area is better for all of them together. That is somebody more likely to go to a town that only has one dispensary or a small town that has 5? So if you don't find the bud or the edible or whatever it is that you want at one place, you don't necessarily have to get in your car and drive to another one. We haven't seen much in the way of green zone concentration of businesses. I'm not even aware of any municipality that's done that. I'm sure there are, but that where they say, you know, give us the worst area of town. Let us put all the damn marijuana businesses we want in this sector and let us show you what it can do. But I haven't seen that happen yet. So those are my comments.
Awesome. I love it. I wanted to ask you, because I know you said something, you made a comment on this at the last MRA public hearing. What can be done to change the current setup that gives the municipalities so much authority, both in the medical and commercial law? Or what would need to be done?
If you're talking about the opt-in, opt-out
Yes.
issue, so our experience with medical marijuana, as we all know, was that so many communities opted out, even though they had to opt in, but the Michigan Townships Association was running around telling people you have to opt out or they're just going to do it here. And so a lot of communities opted out of medical. And then when we got to recreational, out of an overabundance of caution, a bunch of communities have opted out. But there are some other communities where people on the township board had said to me, you know, we're not going to opt out. We just want to wait and see what happens. And, you know, they could always put a moratorium on more businesses once they hit whatever they think is reasonable or slow it down a little bit. And when we drafted the MI legalized proposal, we were upset with all of the opting out. And so we wrote it where a community that you could put a business somewhere unless the community opted out. That was the way it was written. That's the way it speaks to that. And in the beginning, Lara and the Township Association and Municipal League and everybody was saying, you know, if you don't opt out, they're going to go ahead and do this because of the language, the way it is. And Lara had even said that. And then when push came to shove and people were trying to establish businesses and communities which had opted out, Lara changed their tune. And I think from pressure from Detroit, I'm not sure, as saying that, well, if you haven't opted in, or you need the attestation signed by the clerk, and if you don't have that, we don't care if they've opted in or not, you're not going anywhere. And I think that was wrong, and there is litigation pending, I believe, over that issue. It's in the Court of Appeals, but it's going to be, you know, a year before the Court of Appeals rules on that, and then it may well be appealed. So eventually we may see that the truth of that come out, but by then everybody will have either opted in or opted out. So it's unfortunate that that's the way it is, because the language is pretty clear about that, I thought. And it's unfortunate that the Court of Appeals says, well, that's what it says, but that's not what it means, you know. And I was going to write a book of court decisions where they said, that's what it says, but that's not what it means. Well, don't we all speak English here, as I often say, you know?
I think
So.
you should. And what could business owners in the cannabis community do as a whole to help progress cannabis business opportunities in our communities? Any advice?
Hello?
Yep, you there?
Sorry, I didn't hear the whole question.
Sorry about that. There's a little freeze. What could business owners and the cannabis community do as a whole to help progress business opportunities in our communities? What advice would you give our industry as a whole?
Well, some people are just too blatant in trying to buy off the community. You know, we're going to buy you a fire truck. And I don't think that goes over well if it seems like a bribe. I think there's a different way to put it, which is we are going to buy a fire truck so that we know that our business is protected. And as a side benefit, the rest of you are going to be protected as well. So you don't say we're doing it for you. You say, you know, this is one of our needs, and there's going to be a ripple effect and additional benefits from that. So it's not just like we're doing this for you. And yeah, that whole thing with the churches is just crazy because, you know, some of them are as greedy as anything. And I mean, some of them are straight up, but they all need funding, especially with COVID, with services not happening and people not going there. Their contributions are down. I don't know if that answers the question or what the...
No, I think that's fine. You know, like one thing that I've always thought is just, I just wish more people showed up. You know, those meetings when decisions are being made, you know, it's so important for people to actually show up because, you know, half the time that these decisions are made and there's just 10 people in the room. But there's a lot more of the community that want this. And I think that if there was that representation, that would put more pressure on these elected officials to do something because they're supposed to be making decisions for their community members. So.
Well, absolutely. But too many people are just what's in it for me about that. And, you know, the people on the township board really ought to realize how many jobs this is going to create and what it's going to do for the tax base. And things like, well, we don't want, you know, we often hear stuff like, well, we don't want dispensaries because we're concerned about our property values. Well, there was a study about a year ago that said that residential values within a half a mile of a dispensary are up 4%, and within a quarter mile are up 7%. And so people, I always say, and that's because they're clean, they're safe. People want to live near where they work. It's helping revitalize a neighborhood. And so it's not going to drive down your property values unless you let them be a schlock operation. And Lara's not going to allow that anyway with all of the requirements. And so, you know, just to convince them that economically it's not a hurt. It will actually help things. And it'd be nice if we had some places to point to besides Ann Arbor, because everybody goes, well, that's Ann Arbor, you know, and so they just write that off because Ann Arbor's like a different world. It's funny, in Detroit, there's so many dispensaries on 8 Mile because the city wouldn't allow them in a lot of other places. And I met a lawyer who's in a community group that borders, their neighborhood borders 8 Mile. And he's not against dispensaries, he's just against more in his neighborhood because there already are several. And I mean, I think he's kind of old school, you know, what about the kids? And you know, we're all driving by, seeing what do we explain to our kids about this, and you know, is there going to be smell and all that, and so we never did see eye to eye. He thought that perhaps he and I could agree, and we would work together on a proposal in Detroit, but he really didn't want many more dispensaries, and I do. So we're just not going to see eye to eye on that. And we had talked about doing a local initiative in Detroit before COVID hit, and I would bring it up every month at our Motor City Normal meeting. But lately, I felt like I'm the one dragging everybody else along here, and I don't have the energy for that. You know, I needed a committee of people to step up. I was willing to do the drafting, but I need them to be more enthusiastic. And a lot of it tends to be minorities, Black folks who should have more ownership in Detroit. And to a great extent, they're not sure, you know, how to go about it. And then Councilman Tate, who was, anytime you talk to any of the members of the city council, they're all like, oh, Councilman Tate's handling that, you know, and they would all defer to Tate, even though he's a former cop. And really, he's kind of playing both sides of it, slowing it down for the religious leaders, but acting to the business community like he's actually doing something, which he isn't, because they've had a task force meeting for over a year and they haven't come up with anything. They haven't put out a draft. And supposedly they had a draft in October, and I got into an argument with him at a city council meeting. He's like, if you have any suggestions, just submit them. And I'm like, well, if you would put the draft out, we can make some suggestions based on the framework you're already looking at. And that went nowhere. And then last weekend, his top aide got murdered in Westland. Jermaine Watson, who was a good guy. He actually showed up at one of our anniversary parties and shot some pool with us. And younger Black man who I liked the guy. And there was some, anyway, so that's slowing things down, I'm sure now. And there's also the fact that the Black community doesn't really trust me. And I can't say I blame them. They've been screwed over by white people so much that I get that, you know, but some of the people have known me for a decade and those folks trust me, but you know, it's tough to deal with that. And what we wanted to do was just open it up and say, well, my theory was you take the social equity plan, you say that we're only going to issue licenses to people who are social equity applicants or majority social equity applicants, would bring more diversity into that. So we need more diversity. And everybody complains that there aren't enough Black owners, but nobody's willing to do anything about it. And even the Black community, you know, there aren't any Black owners, but well, why don't you open it up and take the limits off and make it easier for people to do that? And Lara's now trying to figure out how to do education sessions, and because those folks still need architectural services, they're going to need some, at least rudimentary legal services. And and training about cannabis and how to use the metric system and all that.
Right.
So we've got a long way to go. I think it's going to be another 5 or 10 years before the state is built out, especially at the rate that we're going. California only has less than 600 municipalities. We have over 1,700. So there's a lot of work to do. And maybe, I was looking the other day at the smallest municipalities, because there are some cities, towns, and villages that are a couple hundred people. And maybe that's a lot easier to try to deal with that.
Right. Right.
So,
When you get into those larger communities, it gets quite political, you know, it really does. And then you get into some of the small, like I think of like Grand Haven Township, you know, where it would be just incredibly difficult. So, but thank you guys so much for your expertise and for spending some time with us today. I know that Adrian Hemond and Scott Roberts had commitments at noon and they had to jet, but I appreciate Tammy, you and Matt, and both Adrian and Scott for being here and being a part of this conversation. We do have our virtual virtual networking event next Wednesday at 4 o'clock. We hope to see you all there. Go to cincyconnects.com to register, and we'll be working on our upcoming buzz session. I don't think we're going to have one next week, but we're going to work on one for 2 weeks from now. So have a great weekend, and we'll be seeing you all very, very soon. Have a good one.